Can everyone see that? Yep. Okay, great. Thank you so much for inviting me to this. This is, I was saying to David that he didn't know this, but I'm actually adopted Korean. And so this is kind of a really neat experience for me to actually share this work. So I have titled my work, Applying Critical Hope in Research and the Classroom. And I just wanted to, as a teacher, instructor, just wanted to go over a little bit of what I'm going to be talking about. So I'll be talking about my own background and how I came on the understanding of my own hope and the hopes of communities that I work with. And I also want to talk about this conceptual framework of the pedagogy of hope, which is Paulo Freire, and critical hope, which is Duncan Andrade and Zimbalist, and myself, Martin. And then I want to apply it and share what how you cultivate hope and apply third spaces in a US context. And also talking about a little bit about my transformation as a researcher and as a person of color. And then talk about a little bit about the book that I just came out as an editor. It's really focusing on Global South scholars, as well as focusing on BIPOC scholars, which are Black, Indigenous people of color. And then lastly, I will talk about kind of a Kenyan context where I did a lot of my first initial research in my dissertation and at Kakuma refugee camp. And then I will conclude of what the next steps I'm doing in my work, and also hopefully have time for questions and answers. So I'm a practitioner, educator, community-based action researcher, and scholar. And I wanted to share just a little bit about how I embody hope. And this is a TED Talk that was done, that was based in India. And I want to share this. This is, you'll see a lot of my own artwork throughout this presentation. So if I may, this is about 10 minutes long, but it does have a lot of graphics and movement, so I hope that it's not so boring. I research hope. This is kind of the hope that is to strive to be better and being cognizant of the tension between what is, what was, and what could be. This is the kind of hope of having a goal and a pathway to that goal and the motivation to do so. This is the kind of hope that anchors me in the classroom when I teach at my university. This is the kind of hope that confronts unjust systems through meaningful dialogue and empathic responses. I research hope because most of the time I live in despair. And this is the kind of despair that is full of sadness. And when I'm in this hole, I'm not sure how to get out of it. But I've been there countless times. And so that leads me to think, I know a way to move through it. But the collective of heaviness of the world often overwhelms me. In light of my own depression and despair, when I returned from my 3-month Rotary Peace Fellowship, I started my card campaign on my personal Facebook page. I wrote on the page, I don't know about you, but there's a little voice of madness in me that thinks I can wrap my arms all around you, and its name is hope. And that voice wants to tell you that you matter. You are important and valued. And you are not alone. You are loved, admired, and wanted by me. And I also wrote that madness has a twin.
and their name is despair. And I suppose that we all need a little despair to educate our hope, to make sure we prioritize what is important. And I wrote, if you are in that hole of despair, I have a ladder. No doubt I've used it countless times, and perhaps I'll need to use it very soon. And if you invite me, I'm happy to come down and sit with you and be with you. I won't fix anything. I'll just be with you. I'm a counterphobic, and that is someone who runs towards fears in the hopes of overcoming it. And mine is rejection and not being enough. And the fear of living in my own depression threw me forward to do something that I feared the most, being vulnerable. And so I chose the medium, a permanent marker and watercolor, because both are uncontrollable to an extent. And also, I've never seen myself as a drawer or a painter. I never thought that I was very good at it. And so, in light of that, I also chose to show the process of my drawing to deal with my own fear of rejection. The act of giving the card to people that I love, strangers, or just folks who need some encouragement, help me understand how to love, how to hope, and what it's like to be just enough. And yet, people will see that my feelings of self-doubt, self-disappointment, and despair show all the way through my drawings. And it's because I recognize how little I know. And I recognize the stories of collective loss, hope, and adversity. And so I drew pictures for my community that supported me. I drew pictures for people who are dealing with their own demons of not being enough, physical ailments such as cancer, depression, and sickness. I drew pictures for people who needed encouragement because their life appeared to be falling apart. I drew pictures because that's the only thing I could do at the moment. I also posted pictures of my own demons. I posted pictures of what I've been meaning to say to people, but my depression leaves me voiceless. I drew pictures of people that I deeply admired. And then I wrote little comments to help other people understand why we should admire this particular person. My cards are cards for others, but selfishly, they're also to myself. They're self-affirmations to myself because these days I deeply want to give up. Hope. Hope is innate. It's an ontological need. And to embody hope is knowing someone like my Uncle John. For a post-polio survivor, almost 80 years old, he knows what a global virus can do to a body. But he also has shown what a virus can't stop him from doing, which is going to college, being a high school history teacher, and living independently and fighting for disability rights. Hope is being still, staying in the space as long as you can so the person can share their own story. Hope is a reflective process. It is an opportunity to reconcile identities and restore agency. Everyone hopes, and those who hope deeply are often who travel through the sea of despair and come out on the other end and tell us about it. And my brother, Josh, wrote me, "Staci, remember, you were never unwanted. You had 4 people wanting you even before you were born." And for me, as an adopted child, hope is recognizing that there are far more people that you may know or not know that love you, that you are more than enough, and that you will see yourself the way most people see you: complex, beautiful, and imperfect. When hope appears as a collective group of people, we can bring our own hopes, desires, and skills to feed that despair. And bringing all different perspectives, cultures, identities, and experiences, we can indeed make meaningful changes. And yet, despair also informs us, and we need to listen to it. When we recognize that we play a vital part in co-creating these spaces of hope, we can think of more in collective terms. A co-researcher of mine said, "Staci, it's not hope for me, but it's hope for my family. It's hope for everyone." I research hope. I research despair. And in researching, I found that whatever you have to offer is significant. And there will always be someone who needs what you can give. And so if you need a card or know someone who needs a card, contact me. You, the act of asking me, reaching out, you have embodied that hope that we all need. Thank you.
And so I have been doing this campaign of cards. I've sent out cards in almost all continents. And I'm up to around maybe 300 cards that are sent out that have been asked for people to send them out. And so that's also something that if you're interested, please Facebook me, and I'm happy to send a card to anybody, yourself or anybody that you feel like that needs encouragement. And I did that during the height of the pandemic, just because I just felt like that there was such a sense of despair, and we just need some glimmers of hope in this world. So going back to a little disjointed, but going back to the theory of critical hope, I'm a learner first and a teacher second. And my conceptual framework is critical hope. And critical hope derives from 3 disciplines: philosophy, psychology, and education. It draws from affective, cognitive, psychological aspects while creating spaces that support social action and social awakening. The role of critical hope acknowledges that there are systems that favor dominant society at the expense of others. And when we address these unjust systems through meaningful and reflective dialogue, oftentimes decentering and disruption happens. And this is where critical hope can manifest and ultimately foster change and transformation in students, teachers, and communities. When we use critical hope as a pedagogical tool, pertinent questions are asked of whose voices are heard in describing certain communities and experiences, and whose voices are absent. I research with communities that are impacted by forced migration, because any of you could be one of these people, including you, and of course me. Currently, 82.4 million people are forcibly displaced. Half of them are under 18. And I would say this is not a migrant crisis. It is a failure to protect, support, and contextualize issues. And this is an animation that I made a couple of years ago regarding how these conceptual frameworks coincide with education and migration.
Why should canon narratives of refugees matter to me? It is because the current rise in migration as a response for individuals seeking basic human rights of safety and education. Implication of leadership and policy decisions of what to do with the rise of migration is staggering. The significance is that these leaders and policies often dictate what is being taught in the classroom and how children are seen in the classroom, and what kind of supports are offered to children with these kind of circumstances. Migration is happening and will continue. In the world, 59.5 million people are forcibly displaced. Internally displaced persons, or IDPs, are among the world's most vulnerable people. Unlike refugees, IDPs have not crossed an international border to find sanctuary, but have remained inside their home countries. Asylum seekers are people who are seeking international protection, but whose claim for refugee status has not yet been determined. A refugee is defined as a person outside his or her country of nationality who is unable or unwilling to return because of persecution or well-founded fear of persecution on account of race, religion, nationality, membership in particular social group, or political opinions. Only 3% of refugees are 60 and older. 46% of refugees are between 18 and 59 years old. 51% of refugees are primary and secondary school aged. How do we co-create hope and possibility in the classroom for our students who have refugee status, when the dominant voice in the media, classroom, and policies are regularly depicting the negative impacts to the host country's economy, national security, education, and welfare system? These are often myths, such as taking jobs, increasing crime, and abusing the health and educational systems. We as educators need to take a critical stance and learn from our families and draw from their strengths of culture, parenting, and hope to find ways to engage with them on a level that we are able to affirm and acknowledge their stories, their hopes, and despair, and possibilities. We need to recognize why, how, and what we are complicit in. Then we may transform ourselves, our institutions, our policies to push forward ideas that are more equitable. We need to co-create spaces that offer hope with action and results. We need critical hope. Critical hope is at the intersection of critical theory and hope. Critical theory's central focus is that people's beliefs and motivation are deeply established by the social and cultural context of which people participate in. When these social and cultural contexts are questioned, then it becomes a social criticism that provides justification for social action and reimagining of the dominant narrative. We need organizational development and leadership that critically examines assumptions of rules and asserts that the rules have socially constructed origins. We need leaders who are compassionate and social justice oriented. We need to find a holistic framework that searches for the best in people, their organizations, and the world around them. We need policies that give access to quality education, both in the global South and North. We need to understand how education is inherently linked to other policy implications, such as migration, national and global security, and equity. We need critical hope that is like a lighthouse, one that tells students that we are in the struggle with them. A lighthouse that warns them when they are approaching rocks, reefs, and shallow waters, which together we can navigate. A lighthouse that offers a comforting sign that the calm waters of a welcoming harbor are close at hand, and serves as a beacon of hope.
So cultivating third spaces in research is not that easy, and it takes time and energy, an enormous amount of patience from all parties. And I argue that we need to bring more research, theories, practices, and interventions that are grounded in the lived experiences and impacted communities. And here are 3 ways that I have, with my partners, have cultivated these kinds of third spaces and centering culture in the act of transformation, research, and peace-building context. First, my drive and determination is to co-create spaces where everyone is heard, seen, and valued. And these are spaces that are not giving voice to the voiceless, but rather co-creating spaces where those voices can speak for themselves and be heard. I am committed to co-creating practical solutions that are culturally responsive and are led by and for and in partnership with the community. At my local university, I had the opportunity to co-write some articles with my former students. What is significant about this article was not actually the article itself, although the article was very important, but what was asked of me after we wrote the article and it was published. This article is quite interesting in the sense that it is refugees that are co-written with a colleague of mine that's based in Canada. And I'll be talking a little bit about Salome, who was actually one of the co-authors and is a refugee herself. And she was asked to do a racial equity talk in Oregon. And she actually asked me to join in. And so this is her talking about her experience.
While attending your class, I really felt like I was included. I felt like I fit into the classroom, and just you being the way you are and the way you were teaching made me feel very confident. Visual at my church, St. Philip Neri, last year. First, I wanted to bring awareness on the discrimination that is everywhere in the world, and in particular in the United States. Me being Black and having my family, my children, and living in that fear of not knowing that tomorrow will happen to them, or even to me as a Black woman. I was asked if I had someone in mind that could maybe present with me, or someone who can share the same idea as I do.
And so Salome invited me into her space and asked me to do something that was vulnerable and hopeful. And I shared to the congregation about how the murders in Atlanta brought me back to the younger days where I couldn't understand why God made me brown. It is rare that I share my own feelings as an adopted child, and I've learned how to be a chameleon. But sharing this speech to Salome's congregation transformed my perspective about myself, and I'm grateful that I could support her as well as find my own voice in the process. Another example that I would love to share is Centering, is an edited book around Global South scholars in the Western Academy, harnessing unique experiences, knowledges, and positionalities in the third space. And this is a book about lived experiences of scholars and academics from the Global South, and also Black, Indigenous people of color, BIPOC, who have professionally migrated to academic institutions and currently located in the Global North. And one of the things that's very significant about this book is that there are over 30 co-authors in this book. And over that, there's only one lead author that is white. And the rest are of color or from Global South scholars. And one of the things that we said was, Deepa and I, the editor, said is, if you wanted to be a lead author and you identified as white, your second author needs to be someone from the Global South or BIPOC. And so all of these articles are written from the perspective of the Global South or BIPOC scholars. And they're all junior scholars, which is just really an awesome undertaking of having all these different scholars writing about their experience in the Western Academy. Last, I want to share about the work of my Speaking for Ourselves action research that I've been doing in Kenya, and I will be doing it. I've been doing it also in Thailand as well as Cambodia. Since I take a community-based action approach to research, where the community identifies the problem, the research is designed around that problem, and the community uses the research to decide and inform them on the steps that they take in order to resolve that problem. This is my approach. I don't know if it's good or bad, but one of the things that has come out of it is publications that are not English only. And this is something that I also argue is that we don't need English only. And I know that we're part of the English as a second language here, but one of the things that I find fascinating is having the co-researchers. These were actually all co-researchers from Kakuma refugee camp, to actually see their language, written language in a book. And so they had the ability to have it and share it with their community. And this is their work and what their feelings are about the work that we did together. And so this is something that I really would like to encourage us to think about, of creating that sense of critical hope, is understanding how valuable the culture and also the home language is. And here is another example. I frequently co-present with my co-researchers. And here's a paper that I wrote with Vestine, and she is from Rwanda. So this is all in Kinyarwanda. And this is a conversation that we had in this actual paper that you're welcome, it's open access, so you're welcome to find it. And basically, this is her understanding of how she came into who she actually is seen as a researcher. And what's written here in Kinyarwanda is, she's going to say it in English.
Researching increased my self-confidence because I did something valuable for my community. Whenever I saw researchers, I always thought that they are the only ones meant to do research because they studied for that. I never thought that I can also contribute by doing research. I thought my contribution was always limited to giving information. I didn't think this could happen. Actually, being a researcher with someone in the universities of the United States and being in Kakuma refugee camp, I thought this is something that I was not able to do.
And indeed, Vestine is able to do, she's been co-presenting and also has authored a couple of papers with me in understanding that her expertise of a lived experience has just as much value and just as much knowledge that needs to actually be able to share it out. And so one of the things that I've tried to do is provide that access for other junior scholars or scholars that are wanting to have a voice in the academy. And so I'm finishing up here is that next steps, I am working in Cambodia right now and building a book that's called, it's a working title, Moving Towards Peace. Well, one of the things that's really important for me is to make sure that not only do we have academics about peace building and nonviolent communication and different processes, but we also have that it's actually framed in Southeast Asia context or Cambodia. And so what we've done is with the organization that I've been working with is we've paired up what we call a content expert, which is more academic, with a field expert. And the field expert is actually based in Cambodia. And they're working together in writing chapters together. And one of the things that's very significant is that they're both paid equally in doing these chapters. And they're both seen as equal producers. And so the folks that are field experts are building in that missing part of the peace building that's very contextualized. And so this is something that I really would like us to think about when we're actually doing textbooks and books that are based in culture, is to actually partner with the culture. So the culture is highlighted and also contextualized. And this will come out most likely in 2023. I'm also under a Fulbright that I went to Thailand. I'm going to be returning there, is co-researching with Karen Refugee Committee. And so what my Fulbright is looking at youth in Thailand. And so what we'll be doing is working with the Karen refugees as well as Thai youth and migrant youth, and talking about their hopes and aspirations of what they want in their country. And I'll be using a lot of the art-based methodology and also the SOAR approach. Lastly, I'm consulting with Education Collaborative and international schools, and we're creating some diversity, equity, and inclusion and social justice curriculum. I put that there just because this is English as a second language, and I'm sure that they are collaborating with a number of these kinds of international schools. I would say, wrapping up, that, I would just encourage all of us here is to ask what your schools want, what your communities want, and really engage in that conversation and see what ideas they have for transforming their own world. And that's where we can build that capacity so they can actually go forth and do it without, a lot of the times, without our help. They just need some space in order to work through that. And I would also say is when there is hope in the conversation, there's so many possibilities to go forth. And I would encourage all of us to think about that, that infusing hope into your curriculum and infusing hope into your conceptual framework and how you're actually teaching is something that will motivate students and support them. And I will end, not necessarily with despair, but I will say that despair needs to happen also in the classroom. Despair is a socially constructed definition that we think that is a bad thing. But oftentimes out of despair, a lot of our students find hope. And so the despair is more of a challenge. And so I would say that it's not so positive psychology aspect, but it's more of a reality of that there's going to be hope and despair, and how to actually cultivate and nurture that hope in that process. And with that, I am ready for questions. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Staci. It's a really fascinating topic. And I'd like to invite people who have questions to go ahead and ask, or if you'd like to type them in the chat room, that's also welcome. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about the art-based methodology that you use with students. I've seen your postcards, but how do you bring students into that?
Yeah, I think that that's a really great question. What we do when we bring students, we do a process of workshops together, and they're all art-based in order to actually come and figure out what is the problem that we want to look at. And then what we also do is what are the solutions? And that's used of collage work, also used of, I mean, just the basic of writing and storytelling. We don't have a lot of that in school system, but storytelling is quite reflective, and also has the ability to challenge some of these status quos of what they're actually doing. So that's what we integrate. I have developed 4 violence prevention, peace building programs, and those are all art-based as well. And those that have a series of workshops as well, of making books, of making dolls, and doing storytelling around it. And I'm happy to share that as well. And I think that you could actually, in my website that I think is linked there, my personal website, it shows a whole aspect. I didn't talk about that, but that's what I've been doing. And that's really where my dissertation came from in Kenya. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, great. I was wondering, have you ever experienced reluctance among learners to participate in the discussion and get involved with research? And how do you deal with that?
I actually, believe it or not, I have not had reluctance, just because one of the things that I try to do is put them in the driver's seat. So they get to decide what direction we're going, which is actually very scary for a researcher, because I'm a control freak. And I want to control the questions, I want to control what's going on, but really allowing that space and co-creating that space for students to come down and say, you know, these are really the problems, Staci. This is what we're really wanting to do. And when they have that sense of self-determination and agency, they have the ability to move forward into a lot of things that, you know, and it's not so much students, well, it is students, but it's also the communities that I work with. It's, oh, I haven't thought about that because I don't have that contextual position. And they have better solutions, far better solutions than I would ever come up with. So there's not a lot of reluctance, particularly also when you infuse art, because everyone, and I do, as you can see, a variety of different ways of storytelling, of actually creating books, of actually, you know, doing different mediums. And so students and communities feel like that they have a space for them.
All right, it looks like we have a question in the chat room. Craig Wainwright says, is it possible to share a story?
Yes. So this is actually not a part of the research per se. It's so I have I had an opportunity to work with some really courageous young women in Jamaica in doing my violence prevention program. And one of the aspects of the violence prevention program is reading your story aloud and then getting feedback from your peers. And one of the things we had is one of these particular students, she was, from my understanding, was a underserved and quote unquote at-risk student. And one of the things that transformed through the 4 workshops that we did with her is that she shared a story about her father, her stepfather, not liking her. And this happened to be surrounded by 7 other young women. And one of the things that was really encouraging is that the feedback that she received about that story and that conflict was that these women knew what she was talking about and offered quite a bit of empathy and in many aspects also solutions to her problem because they have been there before. And this is something that I didn't create. This is something that these 8 young individuals created in that space. In fact, we had the principal there, and we also had the co-teacher that I was working with. And we were just set back. And this little group of young people just spoke from their heart about what's going on in their lives. And I think that's one of the things that we also need to do as teachers is take a back seat and let these young people lead and let them understand that they have that space to lead and to have that agency.
Yes, we have another question in the chat room. What are the ages of the students that you normally teach?
So I teach at a university level, but the work that I mostly engage in is youth. And I take the African Charter definition of youth, so it's very broad. So youth is usually around 13 to 35 years old, which is really large a gap. But mostly I work with 18 to 35. And so that's the work that I've done. However, the violence prevention programs that I developed in South Africa, Nepal, Jamaica, and Kenya, some of them were primary level and secondary level. So I'm pretty much all over the place. I do teach at my university, juniors and seniors. But the work that I do, the research I do is mostly around 18 to 35-year-olds.
And we have several other questions in the chat room. Jocelyn Wright asks, I have a book on my shelf entitled Education for Socially Engaged Art. Would you recommend any similar references?
Yes, I mean, I think there's a number of books that I don't have them at the top of my head, but I'm sure I could find some references and support that and send it later. But I think that there are a lot of different ways to engage students through the arts. And I wouldn't say the arts is not just painting and drawing. I would say the arts is music, theater, movement. And I know that people also add sports, and I don't think that we talk a lot about sports and how that engages and how does that actually supports collaboration, camaraderie, and also just friendship.
Okay, and we have a question from So Young Han. She asks, can you share where you might have experienced, seen, or thought of the conceptual framework of critical hope applied in the field of English language teaching and learning specifically?
I think not that I actually am English as a second language teacher. That's not where, but I will have to say that I had an opportunity to come to Korea. It was probably about 15 years ago, and teach English at a local church. And one of the things that a part of what's critical hope is really asking the kids or students about what they think and what their process is. And one of the things that they were really wanting, from my understanding in the classes, is that they were tired. They wanted to play. They were young people. And so what I did is I just made up games. I mean, this was at a church, so it wasn't something that was formal. And one of the things that really brought them a sense of that they're learning as well as playing. And so that's how how my co-teacher and I engaged these students is we would play these really silly games that they would have to actually speak in English and answer the questions in English. And it was pretty fascinating of how quickly they engaged in that because they were playing. And I think that one of the aspects of my work, particularly the psychosocial peace building programs that I've developed, is I am a stereotypical American who is just English. And I don't have any other foreign languages, unfortunately. But my language that I use is the arts. And so I have had the ability to travel to Nepal, Jamaica, Kenya. I mean, in Kakuma refugee camp, there were at least 12 or 15 different languages spoken, but we all spoke the arts. And so that's something that we could all bring people together. And so what I would say is for English teachers is one of the things that I would encourage to look at hope in the aspect of putting that in the classroom is to really bring in play. And this can be at all different age groups. And so that's something that I try to do that in my classrooms, particularly in higher education, as well as I think that I don't think we do that enough in our English as second language. And I don't know because I'm not in those classrooms, but I would really encourage that there would be more interaction and more things to do for these students to engage in the world, as well as critically engage in the world. Like, why do we have English as a second language? I mean, that's a critical question. Why is English a dominant and colonial language? And why can't we have Hangul, Korean language, as the dominant language? Those are the kinds of conversations we need to have with our students so they can offer a critical perspective of why they're thinking that English will get them through everything. And yet their culture and their language and everything about them is something that should also be very valued in these classrooms. And often I think, at least in the United States, we don't, because we're very focused on English only. But it's amazing. In Kakuma refugee camp, you know, we had so many languages, but one person could speak 5 different languages. That is just, that's awesome. And they could understand each other in different dialects. I mean, why don't we want more of that? And that's something that I think that also supports at least my emerging English learners in higher education is if we integrate, you know, I tell them, you know, write a paper that also integrates some of your culture and some of your language in there. I mean, I'm not going to understand the language part, but you can summarize it in English. But I think that you have an ability to say much more in the language that you feel comfortable in. And that's where students have the ability, and that's in many aspects, you know, Salome was saying that she feels comfortable in my classroom. And that's what I said, you know, if you need to say these things in a language that you feel comfortable in, do it. And then unfortunately, we're going to have to go back to the core, is summarized in English so I understand it, so I can score it. But really, that she knows that she has value in the classroom.
Okay, it's time for us to wrap up, but a fascinating topic, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about this. For those of you who would like to continue talking about this topic, I invite you to check out the Discord channel for the conference, and we welcome further conversation. Let's express our thanks to Staci for her presentation. Thanks. It was
Thank you, Staci.